This podcast has been produced on the traditional lands of the Gadigal and Bidjigal peoples. From 2RPH, this is Passing Thoughts. I'm Rob Kaldor. This is the series where we talk openly and honestly about death, dying, and everything in between. Later in this episode, I'll bring you our Before We Go segment, where we explore some of the quirkier and more unexpected aspects of life's final chapter. This one is a bit retro, so stick around. In today's episode, Jane Mundy speaks with Bec Lyons about alternatives to standard funeral services. Bec is an end-of-life doula living in Tasmania. She's an advocate for home funerals, she offers independent funeral directing services, and her story is unique and powerful. She starts by talking to Jane about the origins of the current funeral industry.
The modern funeral industry was really born out of logistics. Back in the day, there was a reason that they were called undertakers, and it was because they undertook the movement of bodies. Funeral directors were a logistical thing. And I actually think we should go back to being a logistical thing. We should go back to calling ourselves undertakers, mostly because we should be undertaking the tasks we're asked to do. There's no reason you can't support family and community, but just sort of be the undertaker that holds that together. And I think the reason we've gotten to the point now where we've handed everything over, we've professionalized, we've sanitized, we've medicalized dying and death, and we've handed everything over. We've convinced ourselves we need professionals to do this work. And in, the vast majority of cases, that's just not true. One of the big things I'm passionate about is people making informed choices and dealing with professionals on their own terms. So I'm really keen for people to know that they are in charge of what happens to their person, and they get to make an informed choice over how much or how little professionals have input and do in that time. If they don't want to go and stand in a queue to get a piece of paper, to stand in a queue again to register a death, they don't have to. If they don't want to put someone in the back of a ute or a station wagon, they don't have to. But they can go to a funeral director or an undertaker and they can say, I just want you to do this bit for me, please. We've got the rest. And they can engage with professionals.
It's a matter of leaving control in the hands of the family, isn't it? And the bereaved people, not in the control of the professionals.
It's family directed, it's community centred. But along with that, what you get is agency. Often when someone dies, there's this disempowerment around that. This death has happened to your person. You haven't wanted it. You've had no control over the fact that they've died. So there's all of this stuff, and then someone else comes and takes the body. So there's all of these points of disempowerment. And when you do it this way, what you do is you empower families and communities to stay as an active part of that process. Grief is an emotion that needs something to do. And so that's okay. And so you empower people and they get to make the decisions and remain in control. And that is then their agency.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because in some aspects, families have asked for more agency. For example, they might be preparing an advance care directive, or they might be engaging a death doula or something. But it seems like that stops at the point of death. It doesn't go beyond, as it should.
We've done a lot of reclaiming in the dying space where advanced care directives are coming into play more. People are having a say over how they want to be treated when they're dying. And we haven't quite shifted a lot of that agency. So there's legal implications around, is your body a subject or an object when you die? And, the executor has the say over even next of kin. So there's all of this other stuff that happens because your body and you as a person don't have agency when you're dead. But there's a lot you can do to put the right people in place and the right choices having been made to support that means your wishes get carried out.
Can you give us a bit of an outline of what a home funeral or a reimagined funeral might look like?
Home funeral is not so much about place as it is about service. So home funeral can be at home. It can be in the nursing home where the person had lived. It can be at someone else's house. It can be in a hospital ward. It can be at an actual funeral home of a funeral director in their viewing room. You can do home funeral just about anywhere that is meaningful in some way, because home funeral is really more about the act of service to that person. And it could be spending, an hour with the person, making sure grandma's hair is curled the right way, or the very special teddy bear was put with that child, or the boots went on the wrong feet because that was always dad's joke. Whatever it is, all of those little things are the acts of service that constitute the agency and the autonomy that a family get in their grief to give that act of service to that person. And so what a home funeral can be in terms of ceremony is also really different. The industry sort of goes, well, look, pick one of these coffins, one of these flowers, 30 photos, 3 pieces of music, one of these celebrants, a cup of tea. We'll see you for a 2-hour slot at 3:00 on Friday. That is the standard offering. And that's going to be right for some people. It's not going to be right for others, and that's okay. But the problem is when that's all there is, you're handing everything over and you're getting a bill in return, but there's not a lot of stuff that holds your grief in that. It's a limited set of choices. So I tend to think that we need to reimagine what a funeral could be. And we need to just go, okay, so what is a funeral? It is some kind of ritual or ceremony that is supposed to hold the grief and make it okay to get in your car and drive away from the grave, or know that your person is about to be burned in a cremation, or that ceremonial part of it is the thing that makes it okay. It's the plunge into bereavement that's supposed to hopefully be a healthier bereavement that's going to allow you to live on with some kind of meaning and hopefully the knowledge that you did something. You did that last thing for your person. You had that act of service. And so what if a funeral was beers in the backyard around a campfire? What if a funeral was at the local pub or grandma's favourite high tea cafe? Or, what if the funeral was 3 days vigiling with that person's body? All of that stuff is just as important as funeral, ritual and ceremony, as anything the industry is going to offer.
It's a lot about active participation in it, isn't it, as opposed to being a passive recipient of it.
It is about the doing, and it is about being able to walk away with the knowledge that you showed up and that you were able to do something.
You've said that grief is an emotion that wants something to do. And that's why the doing is so important, not just at the time, but in the ongoing grieving process, right?
I find that grief is just better served when the last thing you do is that act of service. And that comes from staying active in the journey of, doing the paperwork, doing the organising, finding the musicians you might want to play. Yes, there's more work to do, but it's actually the work that will sustain you.
It's more than keeping busy, isn't it? It's more about engagement, right? On an emotional level.
This is doing the emotional work that kind of knits a web around who you are and where you are and what's coming for you, the whole living on. And it builds that bridge for you to go back into what is going to be your new normal. Because your normal will never be the same without that person, but you will get to a point where you haven't thought about them all day, or you haven't thought about them all week. You will find another normal. And all of those acts of service are the things that help you.
And it's not just a question of helping you get there faster, is it? It's about the quality of getting there, right?
It's the gentleness and the peacefulness It's being able to look back and go, well, that was a really hard time, but we did everything that we needed to do. And we had the space to cry, and we had the space to laugh, and we had the space to stay in bed when we needed to.
You've also said that it's important to slow things down and not to rush it, not to get caught up in other people's timelines, and just taking as long as you need to really farewell your person.
Yeah, back in the older days of the industry, they did things really quickly. Often, again, funeral directors, logistics, because there wasn't refrigeration as widely available as there is now. People get hurried into these things, and you're right, they'll call a funeral director when someone dies, and the funeral directors will come, usually within an hour or so, and take that person into their care. Now, from a funeral director's point of view, they are dropping everything to come and turn up for you. And that's how, at least the funeral directors that I used to work with, that's how they would see that. Funeral director is the worst person to be a friend with, because they will leave you at the movie theatre. They will not turn up to dinner, because as soon as the phone rings, they go, right? And that's the nature of it. They want you to know is that they're turning up, they're dropping everything and turning up for you. But what they don't understand, and what I now know on the other side of the community side, is that if you've nursed someone at home for a week, 3 weeks, 3 months, 3 years, and then you make a phone call and they're gone in an hour, that can feel like emotional whiplash. And then you're waiting for when they're available. When is someone able to meet with me? When can we do an arrangement? When is the chapel free? When can we have the funeral? When can we meet with the celebrant? So you're on someone else's time frame. From the start of that process, from that first phone call, you're on someone else's time frame till the end.
I suppose there are some people who want that. They're happy to give over to somebody else.
Absolutely. I am offering something different to that. I can also do the stuff that if that's not for people, I can do both. I can be the funeral director that turns up an hour later, takes the person into my care. That is something that I can do, but it's not something I do automatically. I really try and gauge how they want things to go.
Might you have done that well in advance of the person dying? Might you have had a conversation with the family about how they want things to be when their person does die?
I get contacted at the point of dying, particularly if the families haven't had discussions ahead of time and everyone's sort of going, oh, this is what do we do? What do we do? We haven't talked about this. But if the family has had the conversation about, maybe they do want to keep the person at home for a few hours or a few days or whatever that is, if they've had that conversation ahead of dying, they will generally have reached out to find out, how does it work? What do we need? What do we do? The reality is, if you're going to keep a person's body in a home for a few days, there are things you need to be prepared for. One of them is that you need to cool that person's body much quicker than you would if they were going to go into a mortuary fridge. And so often when people call me ahead of time, when a death is imminent, when someone is actively dying, I will deliver them stuff to keep that person cool so they've got it on hand when the time comes.
What are some of the other practicalities aside from keeping the body cool? What are the legalities, for example? How long are you allowed to keep a body at home?
That's state-based legislation. So in New South Wales, you can have someone at home for 5 days. And after that 5 days, you need to either go into a fridge or be buried or cremated.
What's it like in Tasmania? What are the rules there?
We don't have a time limit. We just have the temperature limit and a direction around public health. So when my dad died, he was 2 days with the coroner. We brought him home and he was with us for another 5 days.
What happened in those 5 days for you and your family?
His death was a suicide. So it hadn't been a long wasting kind of decline for him. So he was quite robust and relatively, he was sick, but he hadn't declined into an illness yet. And so he travelled really well. When he died, we did an objection to the autopsy, which you can do with the coroner. They don't always uphold that objection, but it's always your right to make that objection at the time. And so we did. And in Dad's case, they did uphold. And so they didn't autopsy him. They did non-invasive investigation. And so we brought him into our care. We set him up in his bedroom. So he was on a massage table. He had the things that we used to keep him cool. We also had a portable air conditioner set up in that room. And what happened was, over those days, we had the space to gather our community. We had the space to grieve together, to plan what his ceremony was going to be. When someone dies, and particularly when it's a sudden traumatic death, people want to show up. They just don't know how to, and they don't know what to do. And everyone's kind of got the message now that you don't need 75 casseroles. It's the act of service. What we decided was that we would get a peace pod for him, which is like a cardboard coffin. We would get that, and we would let everyone who came to the house over that time to take a leaf from his garden and actually stencil it. So they painted it and stenciled it onto the coffin. So everyone got to give him something that was going to hold him for his last journey. And that became the giving and the act for a lot of people to show up for Dad. Everything was on our own time frame. If at 3 o'clock in the morning my mum thought of something, she got to get out of bed and go into his room and talk to him about it. It was all really organic. So when we got to the day of the ceremony, yes, we'd been doing a lot of work, but we all had a stake in it because it was our dad, it was our community, and the whole event and funeral and ceremony was what we wanted. It was authentically ours for him.
It sounds as though at the end of those 5 days that there was some sense of readiness to move forward.
I think having the body at home for a prolonged period of time is not for everyone.
Yeah.
But what I have seen with the people who do it is that there is a moment where they go, oh, okay, he's not there now. No, I'm ready to let go. It is a much gentler letting go process. And it gives your brain and your energy and your heart just the space and the opportunity to go, oh, this is where we're at. This is where we're landing. And it negates some of that emotional whiplash that happens when you're constantly on someone else's time frame. The other example I often talk about with that is I've got this fantastic photo of my mum putting face powder on my grandma. And she's doing it. It's 8 o'clock at night, dark outside. And there's this photo of her doing that. And it's just, that photo is the epitome of what home funeral is for me, because we're all sitting around. We spent 3 or 4 days drinking Moscato because that was my grandmother's favourite wine. We're sitting around having pizza and Moscato, and my mum gets up from the dinner table and she goes, I didn't put face powder on your grandmother. And I was like, oh, it's all right. I reckon she doesn't need it, Mum. And she was like, no, she would never have left the house without it. And so here she is at 8 o'clock at night putting face powder with a brush on Nan. And I was like, wow, if that had been in a funeral director's mortuary, my mum would not have slept that night, thinking she had not done what she should have done for her mother.
She felt that she had done everything she could have done, including that small act of giving. Mm. In your experience of offering home funerals, how long generally do people like to have with their loved one?
3 days is usually where it sits. Most people get to day 3 and they go, okay, I think I'm ready for what comes next.
How did you come to have a career in the funeral industry? What was your journey?
Well, I'd moved to Tasmania and did the whole back and forth thing for a little while with, getting settled and family. I started in an administration role, and I was really clear. I said to them, if I stay here, I want to learn everything.
Mm.
And so over the years there I learned everything from what happened in the crematorium. I learned the mortuary stuff. I learned how prepaid funerals worked. I learned how the logistics and planning worked. I was there in total for just over 6 years. I started to question things not far into it. I was talking to my partner and I sort of said, it's amazing the amount of people who walk through the door of this place that have no idea what to do. They don't know what's possible. They go, no one's ever died before. It's astounding to me that someone can get to 50 or 60 and go, no one's ever died before. What do we do? But it happens. And I was like, how do we educate the community on what's possible? And so we started these education sessions, and within 6 months of that, I was redundant from my job. But in that time as well, I was sort of I'm blessed to have some amazing older women in my life as role models and examples. And one of them said to me, oh, do you know what you need? You need a Churchill Fellowship. I was like, what is that? I've never heard of it. And she go and read. And so I did, and I applied, and I was awarded a fellowship. And that was one of those platforms then where I went, okay, what is going on around the world? And how can we do things differently and potentially better here? And so that was kind of where the independent stuff started.
You've been around death since early childhood. And so I guess it's kind of familiar to you. You don't have anxiety around it or apprehension, which people might have if they've not experienced it.
My grandmother was a doula before that word ever hit our social conscience. But I remember as a child, she would take us to people's houses in the school holidays because the house needed cleaning because someone was sick, or visiting at hospitals, visiting at nursing homes. She was doing that work for her community, and that was just normal to me. When I was 8 years old, my grandfather died, and we lived with them. So we lived with my grandparents. I went to school one day and I came home and he was gone. And no one had thought to tell me that he was unwell. And the morning they called to say that he was dying, I remember sitting on my grandmother's bed. Her getting dressed ritual was layered. And it was the most beautiful kind of thing. She would wear the old split drawers, and she would then put a singlet on and then a girdle, and then we'd have to do up the stockings at the back of the girdle, and then there would be a petticoat over that, and then her clothes. And I remember watching her get dressed this morning, and she couldn't look at me. She was crying and she didn't want me to see her crying.
Yeah.
And she couldn't look at me, but still no one thought to tell me that he was actually dying. And I wasn't allowed to go to the funeral because that wasn't a place for children. So I could go and visit sick people with Nan or visit nursing homes or hospitals, but I couldn't go to the funeral. It was so bizarre to me that I was kept away from that death. But that was my first experience of death within my family, and it was formative because my grief had no place.
I think back in the day that it was to protect people, to protect them from the pain of seeing all of this. And there wasn't an understanding of the importance of going through it in order to make sense of it and to experience it.
Part of me now that's an advocate goes in exactly who are you protecting? The adults protecting themselves from a difficult conversation. And that happened. So what it was when I was 17, I was going through in some of Nan's boxes with her treasures, like boxes of treasures. And in there were these cards. And, back in the day, undertakers would give families like thank you cards to send to everyone who'd signed the register. And, that doesn't happen anymore. But she had these cards that were blank from my grandfather's funeral. And I burst into tears. And I went, oh, and I started crying, and I was, my name will never be on one of those. It was just this moment for me and for her and for my mum. And it started this conversation that we then had for probably the next 15 years around what it was that they took away from me. We had some really beautiful and healing discussions, and I found out that it had been my grandfather's wish that I didn't see him like that. And none of that made me feel any better. And as a child, if you are old enough to notice someone's presence, you will absolutely notice their absence. And I lived with my grandfather. This was not someone who I saw on school holidays.
Yeah.
We lived together, and he was quite an unwell human, I now know, but I never used to think twice about it. So he'd lost one leg from cardiovascular disease, and he had gangrene in his existing leg. And I used to sit with him every day as the district nurses would come, and I'd hold his hand while they changed the dressings. So the look of that, the smell of that was okay to me.
Yeah.
Even as an 8-year-old, it was just granddad. It's just what we were doing. And so for me to have that closeness with him and then no space in his death, it was probably one of the most traumatic deaths I've experienced.
But also formative for you, right?
Very. Because it made me really aware of the space for children in death.
Bec, what would you say to somebody who might be thinking about the idea of a home funeral?
That they just need to start with something small. If they're thinking about wanting to spend time with their person, have a conversation with someone who does home funerals. Because a home funeral isn't necessarily this big 5 days at home. It can be just as beautiful as you want to be the one to put your person in a coffin. You want to be the one to make sure the cardigan is on right, or that the buttons don't match up because they could never get them right. Whatever it is, think about the things that are meaningful to you, the things that are authentic to that person, and then have some really intentional conversations with a doula, with an independent holistic funeral director. Get some guidance because there is support out there.
So, Bec, finally, how do you imagine your own funeral?
My funeral is going to be a whole day affair. Everyone gets a day off. It's going to start probably in the morning with a burial. It's going to be a natural burial. So a shallow depth grave and wrapped in a shroud, which I've got a few friends who I know will make that for me. And there will be live music. There will be a person with a guitar at the grave, and there will be a ceremony there. And then the rest of the day, there'll be a wake. And at that wake, there will be more live music, and that's where we will have talking and montages and photos and a damn good meal, because why not?
A big thank you to Bec Lyons. You can follow her online and on socials. Links are in the show notes. Our contributor for this episode was the fabulous Jane Mundy. Before we go, the other night during one of my regular bouts of insomnia, I did what any self-respecting TV junkie does. I went back to the TV show 6 Feet Under. It's been more than 20 years since it first aired, but it still holds up. Created by Alan Ball, the Oscar-winning writer of American Beauty, 6 Feet Under was one of those rare shows that helped launch television's golden age. It wasn't just entertainment, it was existential therapy disguised as drama. Each episode began with a death, a fade to white, and then it dropped us straight into the messy, beautiful business of living. The Fishers were the undertakers, but what they really handled was humanity. Still grieving their patriarch, Nathaniel, they faced love, faith, sexuality, and grief with brutal honesty. Michael C. Hall, before he became Dexter, was outstanding as David. Australian actor Rachel Griffiths was unforgettable as Brenda, brilliant, damaged, funny. It's a perfect mix of chaos and connection. What made the show extraordinary wasn't just the surreal touches of razor-sharp writing, it was how it normalised death. 6 Feet Under reminded us that loss is never far away, but that's exactly what makes life precious. Passing Thoughts is made with the support of the Wicking Trust and the team from 2RPH. Just a reminder, we'd love to hear from you. If you have feedback, topic suggestions, or want to share your own experiences, email us at passingthoughts@2rph.org.au. I'm Rob Kaldor. This has been Passing Thoughts.
This is a Radio 2 RPH production.